Hello everybody and welcome to the edited recording of the April OREF meeting. This meeting was about the Carbon Neutral Islands project with contributions from Aisling Phillips, Becky Ford and Mark Hull. Unfortunately, the internet failed the actual meeting and we were unable to record Aisling's segment. However, Aisling very kindly agreed to re-record the audio, so we were able to combine this with her PowerPoint slides so you can still enjoy her presentation. So over to you, Aisling.
Hi, I'm Aisling and I'm the Community Development Officer for Hoy and Walls for the Carbon Neutral Islands project. I suppose the simplest breakdown of my role is that I work to facilitate discussion between the community of the island and the external agencies involved in the project. And I will go into further detail about the work I am doing in just a wee bit, but first, let's have a brief overview of what the Carbon Neutral Islands project is, and then we will look at the importance of the local approach before finally circulating back to carbon neutral Hoy and Walls. So I'm sure Becky and Mark will be going into this later, so I'm not going to go into great detail on the specifics. But the CNI project is a Scottish Government funded programme to support 6 islands to reach carbon neutrality by 2040. There are levels of support which I have demonstrated in my rather rustic diagram here, but these levels go from Scottish Government to local anchor organisation and include on their way many other groupings, including Community Energy Scotland, who are supporting me tonight. And we want to draw attention to the idea that this conversation is circular, not linear. We want to avoid a top-down approach. This discussion must instead be both bottom-up but also circular, to counter power imbalances, and also in that the decision doesn't have to be made independently in one direction or the other, but rather we should work together to pool resources and collaborate to make actions happen. For Hoy, this process has involved the identification of a local anchor organisation, the Island of Hoy Development Trust, through whom funding is channelled to employ me, the Community Development Officer. We also identified a steering group, which is composed of voluntary members of the community, and we are very lucky in that the steering group is an excellent diverse mix of community members and key island stakeholders, and they are very responsive, helpful and engaged with the project. This engagement is not something to expect in every community you turn to. Each of the 6 islands has a different story to tell in their level of success with steering groups, as it requires time and effort on a voluntary basis in places that are already low on human resource. So the key goals of the project are, well, obviously to reach carbon neutrality by 2040, but also to embrace this as an opportunity to build a sustainable, resilient community, to reduce fuel poverty, particularly pulling on clean, affordable energy to do so, and to support projects that sustain island-based jobs and to promote self-sufficient circular economies. And then finally, to protect and adapt island environments from climate change. But I thought we could jump back and look at how I got here and what this project means to me on a personal level. Just briefly, I think as Becky will be going over the project, the aims and so on, looking at the human side also has value, particularly in how these projects might be successful or more successful by taking on local people. I think talking about the importance of the local approach first helps you all understand where I and the community are coming from, because everything we do is informed by this way of thinking and doing. So I grew up in Hoy in my family home that's been in our family for more than 5 generations. That's a lot of history to be born into. I was also lucky to be raised by parents who know the value of the land we live on, as well as the community that lives upon it. I popped these pictures on screen because I think it shows how the physical geography we are rooted in and its familiarity are so important in explaining how we feel about where we live. They are all taken facing the same beach, the same shoreline, the oldest on the left, from more than 80 years ago. And so I often wonder what my 3-time great-aunt May, in that photo on the left, would think knowing that another 3 girls have been raised in the house she was raised in with her sisters. Ties like these, the cultural and geographical heritage, keep us to the land and they inform how we interact with the world around us. Despite this, I was one of those teenagers who couldn't wait to leave. and I really thought I would never ever come back due to the lack of opportunities. So when I got into the University of Glasgow to study geography, I took my chance and I left. But it was there that my entire perspective changed. The grass really is always greener. What surprised me most was the depth I missed the close-knit community of Hoy and Orkney as a whole. Whilst to some it can be suffocating, the way everyone knows your business, but to me, living in a tenement with no idea who any of my neighbours were, it seemed the preferred option. And then the thing that really stuck the nail in the coffin for the direction of my academic perspective was through some unfortunate university experiences, as I realised the idea that rural communities are backwards and uneducated, and that's a direct quote from my dissertation supervisor, it's really ingrained in many academic perspectives. And this conceived my vested interest in community justice, particularly for rural communities and grassroots organisations at a policy level and community level. And so all of these personal and academic feelings snowballed, and I returned to Orkney, to Hoy, determined to in some way give back to my community. So it makes sense that this is what attracted me to the role of Community Development Officer, because it's exactly what I was championing for throughout my academic experience. And even beyond academia, at the everyday level, we know that we cannot have a just energy transition without community justice. And I believe that that comes from local representation and a rebalancing of voices, raising local Indigenous knowledge into the foreground of every discussion, from local to national to global level. So let's move to looking specifically at Hoy. I'm running on the assumption that most of you, if not all, have been to Hoy at some point, but it may be useful to have a short introduction anyway. Now, I could wax lyrical about the stunning one-of-a-kind landscape, our rare habitats and rarer flora and fauna, but I think what is often overlooked, yet just as important, is the community which inhabits this island. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're forgotten, not at all, but sometimes we think of Orkney as a collective, this wonderful group of islands that works as one against the elements and the peripheralisation of Westminster and, indeed, Holyrood. However, Hoy, as I'm sure many of the other Outer Isles are as well, is different. Our cultural heritage, our traditions, even our dialect accent is different. So I thought it might be useful to share where Hoy feels it sits within the Orkneyan national context, because it's key to the way that this project will play out and is playing out within the action plan and the community's attitude and so on. Whilst we may not always think deeply about these things, from previous and current research, there is a strand of thinking that suggests that Hoy is very much a periphery, out on its own against Orkney mainland and in mainland Scotland. For me, this feeling started as a child going to high school on the mainland. Already you're on the back foot, a little behind in education and a lot behind in social areas. We can't easily attend sports or leisure activities on the mainland because the transport just doesn't match up. And it also makes it much more expensive. A boat, a bus, a full day in town and just for one activity. It just doesn't bode well. And then as you get older, you realise how much is centralised on the mainland and not shared amongst the Outer Isles. I mean, here, funding opportunities, jobs, everything really. Even quality of food. The shop on Hoy gets basically last dibs on food deliveries, so it's lower quality for a higher price due to import and delivery fees. In a place that's already battling the elements and a dwindling population, the lack of investment is unjustifiable. And then, when things do happen, it's with little choice. Developments unwanted on the mainland are shafted off to the Isles where it's out of sight, out of mind, except for the residents who live here. And when you consider that rich, lengthy cultural heritage, well, it's a recipe for disaster. Is it any wonder that there is resistance at every level? It isn't for lack of education or backwardness. It is the frustration at the injustice that prevents change here. Now, naturally, not all of what I've described here is strictly true, but if it is how people feel, then rather than deny such feeling, we must take into account and learn how to do it differently. Again, this drives me to make the case for more local involvement, to make room for local voices. We can turn these developments into positive success stories. even built in the exact same location where they are proposed, if we only include people and make space. Yes, sometimes no one comes to consultation events, but the important thing is that we try everything we can to ensure that they have the choice. And so I hope this in-depth Hoy-specific background has helped you to understand the value of the local approach and why it is so important to understand the specific needs of the local area when developing a project action plan, especially if it involves significant change to or around the community. And so, with this knowledge, let's move to thinking about carbon neutral Hoy and walls. What does this mean? What does it mean to the community? For the past 5 months, I've been building up trust with the community to ensure that their vision for the future is reflected in everything I do. It is their project, after all. Trust, I think, is more important than following the steps of engagement. When you do this without trust, all you do is tick boxes. Instead, you need to lay the foundations for long-term engagement and success through listening, reflecting, and feeding back at every stage. There is no one-size-fits-all advice I can offer. Just if you trust them and their knowledge, they will eventually trust you. So for the first 3 months, I was working with Community Energy Scotland and 2 external agencies, Ether and Adler and Allen, to create carbon audits of the entire island, focusing on the following sectors: land use change and forestry, agriculture, waste, energy and transport. These have now been drawn to a close, and the results on screen now are specific to Hoy. These highlight what we all had already predicted, that land use is our biggest emitter. Specifically, it's peat soils that push the value so high, followed by agriculture, although there is a much bigger gap between the two than we maybe expected. It does not surprise me that agriculture is the highest human impact. Our main industry is agriculture on the island. Now, whilst it's great to have conducted these audits, it's a mammoth task getting island-specific audits when some data sets are only held at a national level and cannot be extrapolated down. And these audits have already shown the benefit of a community-first approach. Applying a global methodology to an island context really highlights the limitations of desk-based and remote assessments. Particularly, there were issues about the validity of local knowledge. Is 1 or 2 local folks' words more or less valuable than a map produced in 1980? Perhaps a question that will never be answered, but it caused a few problems in the data collection phase, and is why some of the details ended up being a bit inaccurate. However, these audits are not the end point, nor what the community have to hinge every carbon cutting decision on. First, they are not the last audit to ever be done on the island, and accuracy will improve as community understanding and engagement grows. Second, they are very much a starting point, a tool for the community to use, particularly useful to validate certain projects, for example, when applying for funding. So moving from audits, the next stage we worked on was working with the local community to draw up the community carbon neutral pathway, which will set out the route to our carbon neutral future. To do so, I spent 2 months engaging with the community at a range of levels, from the large-scale community hall-style events down to the minute, quite literally discussing with folk down the pub, and all of it compiled to give the actions. These are the ideas, the projects the community has put forward as what they would like to see and what they could do to reduce the carbon emissions on the island, and also harnessing those multi-benefits. For example, with fuel poverty such a problem in all the isles, including Hoy, folk here are hopeful that by increasing energy efficiency in the home and reducing the costs of renewable energy, we can simultaneously reduce the carbon footprint and fuel costs of individual homes and businesses. But I'm getting my head of myself. The engagement process so far has been successful, but trial and error. Even knowing the community as I do, it can still be hard to predict what will and what won't work for the island, and it's been different for all 6 islands in the project. Over all the methods I tried, I got over 100 folk to participate, The most successful being running drop-in sessions in the community cafe, which is great for me as well, as I get to lounge about drinking coffee and sampling the home bakes. In terms of engagement, I find it is as important simply being visible and accessible to everyone on the island as it is running an all-singing, all-dancing, large-scale event. I found the engagement session I did with the Youth Hub, so that's ages 12 to 18, incredibly rewarding. There are about 20 young people in that age group, and it's so refreshing to talk to young people who tend to have different ideas, different perspectives, and also different criticisms of life on the island. They are so much more switched on than folk assume, so harnessing their input was incredibly valuable, especially when it raises crucial issues that haven't been considered. For example, they put a lot more emphasis on community outdoor spaces and protecting the natural environment than the grown-ups. Another brilliant engagement technique I did was to run a workshop with the support of Adaptation Scotland, who are part of the organisation Sniffer. And their whole thing is to look at climate change resilience. You will see on screen these two photos on the right are from that workshop. The workshop was designed as a participatory mapping exercise where, using question prompts but also discussion flow, we thought about what current climate impacts Hoy is experiencing, the future impacts that may occur, and then finally look towards a more hopeful future by considering how the island can first mitigate these impacts and secondly adapt to the inevitable ones. The output of the session was first these insane cram-packed maps, but then the brilliant designer Orla Stevens, who's produced a lot of work for folk in Orkney before, took them and produced these. Obviously, these are super highly detailed, so not great for a presentation, but the level of information on them is fantastic because it shows the wealth of local knowledge on what can sometimes be quite a complex and difficult subject to discuss. It gave us a wealth of information and project ideas for the community carbon neutral pathway, but also serve as the basis for a whole separate or parallel project looking specifically at adaptation to climate impacts. For the community, they ground what can often be vague, faraway climate impacts in a local reality, which inspires clearly the need and motivation for action. It's also just an interesting alternative format to display results rather than often dry, hard-to-read report. These will be printed within the action plan, but I'm also planning on publishing them in their own booklet with more information if you are interested in how these can support and diversify any climate-themed discussion. Now, there are still areas to improve. I struggled to get businesses to contribute, and then there are a few groups on the island I need to reach out to, the primary school and then farmers as well. Naturally, farmers can be difficult to work with when talking about environmental issues, but I think they should be central to this discussion, and they should be seen as a large part of the solution rather than a problem to be solved. So there's plenty yet to be done, but it's an exciting time. We are working on finalising the action plan, as I said earlier, and just to reiterate that it is this plan that sets out the pathway we are taking as an island and as a community to not only reach carbon neutrality, but also to lower fuel poverty, embrace clean fuels and clean energy, and to strive for a resilient community through climate adaptation and a move towards a local circular economy. Within the action plan, we have identified a few quick wins that we hope to have well underway this year. Some may even be completed. As shown on screen, you can see two of these that focus on the energy and transport sectors, as these are both priorities to the community, but also significant emitters on the island. Quick wins are not the only projects we are looking at, but they are the ones that will give us something tangible to see, hold, and use to anchor the project into reality, and hopefully also anchor in some of that sweet funding we always seem to be chasing. So to quickly summarise, these are the Legacy project, which is looking to replace the community turbine, which is entering its final phase of life. So these solar PVs that power battery storage systems and feed individual homes rather than through the grid. And then the Community Green Transport Scheme, which is in two parts. First, the electrification of all community-owned vehicles. We have a community bus fleet as well as 2 community cars, which are conveniently already electric. And then the other part is to start an e-bike scheme, which in phase 1 would see the bikes available for use by the community, but later phases introduce hubs across the island, increasing access for both tourists and community members, and hopefully eventually these would be able to support a paid maintenance role. So yes, I hope that in a few months' time, or not even that long, with the action plan and an investment strategy under my belt, I'll be able to be a lot clearer about exactly what steps Hoy is taking. But it is early days yet, and I don't want to presume decisions that do, at the end of the day, belong to the community. That's why I haven't gone into great detail on exactly what ideas the community has, or what the year ahead may look like. It would be unfair to tell you guys when I have yet to even share or launch the finalised version with the community. And I'm doing my best to stay in their good books. And so I'll stop rambling. I could clearly go on for hours on this topic. I just want to conclude by returning to the project's core aim. There can be no sustainable development here without community support, because what value is there in a sustainable carbon neutral island if no one wants to live there? This project makes space for local knowledge to inform local solutions, and work done is by the community for the community. I work for my island. I love Hoy and I want to see it continue to thrive for as long as possible. That is why I believe in this project, because it not only drives forward the case for carbon neutrality as one part of the solution for climate change, but also because it benefits the community and offers the opportunity to flourish, develop, and maintain what makes Hoy, Hoy. With that bearing in mind, I'll leave the floor. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, that was it. Perfect. And that's the main bit of today was really to hear everything that Becky, that Aisling and the Hoy group has been doing and developing, especially in Orkney, to take this project forward. And it's been a power of work over the last 6 to 9 months to get there, and it's really phenomenal. But it's probably just a really good example. Another reason to have the meeting today, especially at OREF, was seeing the opportunity and how that opportunity came to arise, what we can do in islands, how these things happened. And that's some of the brief context. I know we're running a wee bit late, and for that point of view, we'll skip through it. But it's also just to set how it came about. I think there's always, OREF has been passionate and done a lot of work on energy, on decarbonisation. But more and more, we're all getting to the point where we realise we have to do this in the whole. What we have to be doing is climate change action, adaptation and resilience, and making sure we're doing it in the whole. And it was really sort of taking that and taking the lessons we've learned from being able to take community action and community owning our solutions in energy, and taking that into sort of decarbonisation and climate change action. The opportunity came about by this initiative called the Carbon Neutral Islands Initiative. And Scottish Government came up with this idea that they wanted to demonstrate carbon energy potential of Scottish islands as hubs of innovation in renewable energy and climate change resilience, whilst positively impacting on island economies and population retention and growth. I liked it from the beginning because it's not just about decarbonisation, it's about how we thrive in our new environment and how we live in our new environment. I think that's really key. I always forget his name every single time. I always picture the guy in the Marvel films at the end, the villain, when he clicks his finger, half the people in the universe disappears. That's a good way to decarbonise. It's not a good way to live into the future. So it's taking that example. We're looking at solutions of how we live and thrive within that. The Scottish Government were forward thinking, and they saw an opportunity with their islands. Similarly, at the same time, work that was happening with through OREF and through people like CS, where we're looking at our islands and just thinking what is special and what's different with our islands from an energy point of view. And I put the slide up at the last AGM, and I'm shamelessly going to use it again because of the people that are here. What are our island communities? And we sometimes see ourselves, and we can see that we're the world writ small. And what we mean by this, Aisling said remote. We say remote location. Sometimes everyone's remote from us, rather than have to look at the way the world is set up and how the supply chains are set up. But we have this idea of going to be the remote locations. But being there, we're often the first to experience the challenges that we all will face, nationally and globally, from that point of view. And we have islanded systems on islands from an energy point of view, infrastructure, but also socially and things like that. But they create specific challenges for resilience and mitigation. So we have experience of dealing with these. We have history, we have cultural history, we have history within these communities. But we have a sense of identity you get from an island. The fact that you have that boundary, which is the sea surrounding you, and that creates a sort of tradition of self-reliance and increases citizens' action across these communities. And we're not living laboratories. Gareth isn't in here today. We go back and forwards about this. I'm passionate that we're not living laboratories because we feel like people looking down on some rats running through mazes. But the scale, the discrete nature of island systems allow demonstration and pathfinding. And we say shining a light for us all because we can be, I got clicked the wrong way. We can be lighthouse communities. And that's an image we use very strongly within carbon neutral islands. It's the idea, you do see the weather, you are on the edge, but if you learn and your knowledge, you have the ability to shine that and help and inform others. We took this idea and tried to sell it to the Scottish government because they have this passion to do carbon neutral islands. It's carbon neutral islands has a real risk of being a political exercise. Because Scotland had one of the most ambitious climate change targets in the world. And they had this idea of net zero by 2045 nationally. They had a piece of legislation that went through, and we're really delighted as island communities from that point of view. There's been a bespoke piece of island-focused place-based legislation, the Island Scotland Act 2018. That's really important in Scotland. It's quite groundbreaking from that point of view. It's led to a national islands plan. It's also led to every authority by right now, by law, should take into account how they implement their policy and their actions and how that affects islands. And if it affects the islands differently, they're responsible for making sure that is covered and that's compensated for. And that's hugely significant. It's hugely significant for us as island communities. It also gave us some focus. And so the Scottish Government created the Islands team. That Islands team have been working towards the National Islands Plan, but also they had this idea, right, we'll have these 3 islands that we're going to try and get to net zero by 2040. COP26 came to Glasgow, it became 6 islands. Right. It multiplied up. But all we're talking about here was discussions that are happening within the central belt of Scotland and Holyrood. But the Scottish Islands and Government Islands team, fortunately for us, I'm not going to say we take all the credit, we're having conversations and they were looking to see how they deliver us. They were saying, well, we've got 6 islands, we've got 6 local authorities. They did an exercise where they identified which islands were going to be the islands that are going to be picked. For us, that was quite dangerous and quite a sense of alarm at this, because you're being done to. It's almost exactly the opposite of everything Aisling has just said to you. It's going to say, you're lucky, you can do this. You know what I mean? But we had a conversation with them and said, well, if you get the community themselves to own this, to own the process and to own the solution, we think that's a good way of delivering. And especially for decarbonisation, more than anything else, if we're going to do it rapidly, fairly, inclusively, and take everyone with us, we're going to have to do it with everyone. So much of what we do is going to be what we all change in our lives, and we've got to do it quite rapidly. So I think there's a real opportunity and a real opportunity for community-led action. And we sold this to the Scottish Government. And very kindly, based on that, the Carbon Neutral Islands initiative, this last year, we've had about £1 million for this financial year to actually support 6 communities to do the work they've done across Scotland. We're looking at roughly doubling that this next year. There's a question mark because we're literally debating and discussing and arguing at the moment how that's going to be done. But it's great on the work that people like Aisling and the communities have achieved this year. They had a great session in the Scottish Parliament earlier on in the year. We've been able to persuade others at a time with really tight budgets to put that money, to double that money to carry on doing this work and initiative. And so it's going to be looking good for the next year. But what's created is an island-specific resource that feeds into both the ICNZ for the people here, the Island Centre for Net Zero. It's an initiative that's happening across Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles, and the regional climate hubs. We didn't want to repeat what other people were doing. We wanted to make sure what we're doing was complementary. But the aim of the CNI, very quickly from that point of view, for their initiative is to demonstrate low carbon energy potential of Scotland Island as hubs of innovation in renewable energy and climate change resilience, positively impacting on island economies and population retention and growth. So it's taking everyone with us, a world that we can thrive in, contribute to the Scottish Government's targets, work closely with communities to move towards net zero in a fair and just way. the 6 identified islands, we're calling them lighthouse communities. And hopefully some of what you've heard today is we've managed collectively turn around something that was being done to 6 islands, just in a situation where 6 islands now really own this and they're taking it forward themselves. And so we want to support and lead that these islands can lead and decarbonise by 2040. And then islands themselves can help others and show how we go forward and share these good practice and learning from the project with the Scottish Islands, but also the mainland and other things. A lot of what we're doing, as Aisling talked about, developing ways that we can quickly audit, take national data, use local knowledge to really ground truth it. It gives people something to talk about. It doesn't need to be perfect when you start. You just need to be able to have those conversations. How much peat have we got? What's the impact of that? What's more a priority? It doesn't need to be perfect. It starts the conversation, start people feeling they own the dialogue and their actions. And that's a lot of what we've been trying to do over the last year. But I'm talking too much already, so I'm going to hand over, because when I've been doing all the talking for the last 6 to 8 months, Becky has been the Community Development Officer in CES, who's been supporting Aisling and 3 other islands to do the work they've done over the last 6 months. So I'll step back and let Becky finish off. Okay.
So, as you heard from Aisling and Mark, the biggest challenge we've had has been time. So we had a really tight time frame. I came into post in September last year, so already the slide isn't right because it wasn't July, it was September. And so we've taken the 6 islands through a carbon auditing process, community engagement and priority setting, and then the community climate action plan. And I'll just clarify, we call them community climate action plans. That's what we started calling them. But because some of the islands, and Poise one of them, already have community action plans that they're doing within the island, which looks more broadly at all the issues. So they're specifying it's a carbon neutral pathway to differentiate that. So yeah, so this was the current timeline. September to February was the accounting exercise, and then the community climate action plans, which were on course to finish by the end of April. So we haven't actually said what all the 6 islands are yet. We're talking about Hoy, but there are 6 islands, one in each of the 6 local authorities that have islands. So starting at the top, we've got Yell in Shetland, Hoy, obviously, then Rassay, which is in Highland region, Barra in the Western Isles, Argyll and Bute have got Isla, and then North Ayrshire have got Great Cumbria, which I didn't know where it was until I looked at the map. And you know where Millport is, that's the main town on Cumbria. So each of the islands have gone through the process of identifying a steering group, which are representatives from the wider community, identifying an anchor organisation. In most cases, it's been the development trusts on the islands. And the development trusts have been the anchor organisation which have been given £40,000 of resource to employ their development officers and to support the work that they have done on the project. And they've also had input from CES, support from CES and other partner organisations to carry out the climate audits and to carry out the rest of the project work. Something that's been really, really important is the networking opportunities, and that we've worked really hard to support within CES in particular. There are actually 7 CDOs across the 6 islands because Rassay decided to do things slightly differently, and they've got 2 part-time CDOs on the island. But I would say the biggest achievement for this first year, if we've achieved nothing else, we've got 7 really talented, committed, passionate experts in each of these islands who give us all hope that, when we're having the days when we're having existential crisis about climate change and, the task that's ahead of us, the energy from those CDOs is the thing that keeps us all focused and positive. And they've worked really cohesively together to support each other and to share knowledge. And that's part of what we hope CNI will achieve in general in terms of spreading the learning and good practice and supporting other islands to come on board in the future. And there's also been training through other partners, so the Scottish Community Climate Action Network, SCAN, have been providing training for CDOs and CES staff as well on community engagement. Carbon auditing, I'm not the expert on carbon auditing. So within the CES team on CNI, we have two members of staff who are experts on carbon auditing. So they've been leading the process, my colleagues Cameron and Dara, and have worked very closely with CDOs and along with the external specialists who've looked at land use, waste and water aspects of things. And then there are two of us sharing the same role that I do. Myself and my colleague Anna are the Community Innovation Support Officers. We decided there were 6 islands, we'd split them up as 3 each. So I've got Hoy, Yell and Barra, and Anna's got the other 3. So the carbon auditing process was to develop a comprehensive and robust greenhouse gas inventory to support the action planning for the 6 lighthouse communities, to establish a baseline scenario. And it was really important that while we recognised that each island was going to face its own challenges and was going to be unique and was going to have very different carbon audit results, we needed the methodology to be standardised so that we could work across the 6 islands and learn lessons from them. So we've used the greenhouse gas protocol as the methodology for that. We've also had another organisation, Agri Allen, who've done a blue carbon audit, which is the first time that blue carbon has been used in this way. And that, again, this is a learning process. It's not that we've got it perfectly this first time, but it's about starting that process and learning and taking on board the expertise within the individual islands to refine and improve the methodologies going forward. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know. I'm not the expert on greenhouse gas. But there's probably people in the room who knows far more about greenhouse gas protocols than I do, but there's basically 3 scopes. Scope 1 being what's happening on the island, scope 2 being the emissions that come in with the grid supplied energy, and scope 3 being emissions that can be attributed to the island but which happen off the island. So things like the processing of waste that happens off the island, indirect emissions, emissions from transmission and distribution of electricity, and out of boundary transportation. And from all of that, these were then looked at within these specific sectors, so energy, transport, waste, industrial processes and product use, and agriculture, forestry, and other land use. The point of the audit was to get to the action plan and to get the community to give the community an idea, a picture of what their emissions look like, where they were coming from, and to start the conversations about what they wanted to do, what the vision for their flourishing, decarbonised future community was. So the carbon audit was about giving you a snapshot of that, giving you something to start those discussions. And that's where the CDOs have done all the really hard work. They've been out having those conversations, and often tricky conversations, because I think when you work and think about climate change as part of your job, you kind of wrestle with the whole existential, oh my God, we're all doomed thing. But for other people, they're not thinking about that all the time. And when you're presenting people with information about their specific community and the threat to their specific way of life and their place that they like and have an attachment to, those are serious and difficult conversations. And I think that, that again is why it's got to be led by communities themselves. It's got to be something that they can have those difficult conversations and can really then think about, okay, well, how are we going to tackle this? What does a future resilient, flourishing community look like for us? And it's about identifying projects, identifying things that we can do. And so these are the ideas that have been taken forward by the community, and these will end up in action plans. And these action plans, again, like the audit, they're not the finished product. They are living documents. They belong to the community, and the idea is that the community then has these documents, and they can take them forward as part of an ongoing conversation about how things are developing within the island. They also help to tell the story and to be a tool to communicate with other agencies who are working in the island to explain what the community's priorities are, what's important to them. And these are the themes that we've been looking at within the action plans. As I said before, CES's role is really about supporting. The islands are leading, we're there to support. So we've provided guidance, support with the technicalities of the carbon auditing process, support with the climate action plan drafting, and just kind of being sounding boards a lot of the time. Sometimes we feel like we're maybe not doing that much because the communities are coming with the ideas, they're coming with the expertise. We're really just there to help. One of the things that I think we have done, which is the thing I'm most proud of, is the networking and shared learning. So we have meetings, all 6 islands, the CDOs meet every week. And every fortnight, that meeting is a project group meeting, which is the CDOs and the members from the steering groups and anchor organisations from each of the islands. And we've thought very hard about how we capture the sense of this collective endeavour and the good practices and the learning that's coming out of this. So we made a decision to create a living document of our own for the project, which is the CNI project guide. As a group, we decided on what our shared values were. So that obviously for each island, the project is unique in each island, but as a group, we wanted to have a sense of what the CNI vision was as a group of islands, as a voice then that goes to the policymakers and is able to share what we've learned from going through this process. So that's what goes in the project guide. It's a document that belongs to the group, but CES, we help describe it and make sure that what's in it is what the islands want to be in. And we've also facilitated training, opportunities to get together and support each other. And I'm not going to say very much more, except that the whole point of the project is it's for the island, by the island. And that has got to be at the centre of everything we do, otherwise it's no problem. Have we got any more slides? Oh yeah, I want to tell you about the islands. Yeah. So it's great to give you a sense, because each of the islands is very different. And the point was to have one from each of the local authorities. So Cumbrae is probably the least islandy island because it's the most connected. It's the most connected to centres of population. It's not very big, 4.5 square miles. But they're already experiencing the challenges of climate change in terms of flood defences. So they've got a £27 million flood prevention scheme in the pipeline. A common theme across all the islands is that tourism is one of the main industries. Their anchor organisation is the Cumbrae Community Development Company, and their Community Development Officer is Scott Gibbs. Islay is the biggest island of the 6. It's also the 5th largest Scottish island. It's got tourism, but it's also got lots of whiskey distilleries. Anna has got Anna. How did that happen? Yeah. They've also got a massive steering group. They've got a really, really keen steering group. It's so big that they have little sub-steering groups, which means poor Neil, their development officer, has got his work cut out dealing with a very keen and large steering group. And their anchor organisation is Islay Energy Trust. Rassay is the smallest island. We all went to Rassay for our end of the first year meeting and got everybody together. They've just got a population of 161, but they've got 2 CDOs. They have the anchor organisation Rassay Development Trust, and when we were in Rassay, we got to go and see their run of the river hydro scheme, which is quite impressive. Barra, it's got a population of just over 1,000. Again, mainly tourism, but they do have fishing, and they have a fish processing plant that when we went to visit Barra. We got to go and see around Barra Atlantic. They also are in the process of planning a community campus to bring together health, learning and community facilities on the island. The anchor organisation is Voluntary Action Barra and Battersea. But there's also Kebab, which are the other big community organisation who run the community turbine, and their development officer is Shirley. But just to give you a sense of size in terms of population. And then Yale, most northerly island, has got a population of just under 1,000. Again, they've got a lot of aquaculture, so Cook Aquaculture has got a big processing plant there. The North Hill Development Council is their anchor organisation, and they run the Garth Hill Wind Farm, which you see in the picture. So they've got a big community wind development, and their CDO is Ruben Innovan. And the thing I also want to say about all the CDOs is that they all, which is great, like Aisling, are young people coming back to the island. A lot of them are recent graduates who are coming back and taking on these roles as development officers, and the energy that they've brought to the role is just incredible. And that's just the final slide. Our goals for 2040 is that each island has achieved carbon neutrality and moved on to even greater climate ambition. That the journey's been driven by the island community itself, and that it's been supported and continues to be supported by the islands team, Community Energy Scotland, ICNZ, the regional climate network hubs, and local authorities, obviously, and key roads playing the system. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Learned a lot there, so that was super. And well, actually assisting through the call. It's never a bundle of love. Nice, put some lights up. Oh, yeah, good. Good, you're still there. Excellent. That's a good sign as well. Right. So, any questions for anybody on the floor? Bang.
Yes. So thank you so much for the presentation. It was very nice. And for the Hui, because I was visited the Hui at last April as my first experience on Hui, and that time was actually in the middle of election. And I meet with a councillor, but sadly he didn't elect this time, whose name is Magnus Thomason. And he was talk with me that the reason he want to be a councillor is because he was a farmer, and every farmer of his young age has all moved to other side of Orkney, all moved to other part of Scotland. That's motivated him to be elected as a councillor. And so that I think I really appreciate the opportunity of the carbon neutral islands. But I think I also agree with what Mark says. I think the main aim of the carbon neutral island should be preventing the depopulation of those small islands, because as we remember, the population of those small islands have been keeping decreasing. So first, I think we need to work on a systematic change to how to decrease the depopulation of those small islands. Then we can working on the net zero, so that the net zero is very important. But actually, for those small islands, how to find a sustainable way of earning continual economic development is very important, as well as to do the net zero or net zero development. And for the Hui, I know one of the always debating about the net zero point is about ferries, because that's going to be the scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emission questions, but that's also be the question because the Hui need ferry anyway. But once one day those ferry exist, they will continue to cause a lot of carbon emissions. And also I want to mention on the action plan, because I think the action plan are very nice, but I think I must have seen the action plan and elsewhere, because all the similar action plans were all about to electrifying the cars and to run electrifying bikes, or to install the renewable energies. But we should also looking, demons are always in the detail, as they said. So for example, we all know that the island of Hui Development Trust is quite reliant on the renewable energy, the profit generated by the wind turbines, and currently they use the money from the generated by the wind turbines to run their community bus. But the problem is that we don't know how they will run their community bus once the wind turbines are gone. And also, So we propose they will have a company bus to continue run, but how the bus will run is the problem, I think.
Okay.
Sorry.
There was a lot there.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot there, but I think that the main thrust being is finding ways to stop depopulation, and is
Yes,
critically
exactly.
important. Personally, I find it quite interesting. If you go down to Kirkwall Harbour is exactly the same thing. That was a result of some work done by Thomas Telford back in the early 1800s, looking at how to stop the depopulation of the Scottish Islands, and came to the conclusion you need infrastructure, ports, to help fishing effort, which therefore gives you revenue. And it's interesting how the same thing has come around 200 years later, basically the same model of useful economic activity in these areas, generating the means by which people could stay. But any other questions anyone wants to raise? I've got a couple. Martin, go.
Noticed that about 2/3 of the carbon emissions were due to farming and land use changes. Those farming and land use have potential to actually sequester carbon, but that would mean a change in farming practices. Have you identified what farming practices need to change? How would you
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Could you stand and face the audience?
So we have done quite an in-depth carbon audit to identify the practices on the islands at the moment. But because of the time frame, I feel as though it maybe could have done a bit more in depth, essentially. So this year we are looking to kind of ground truth that data and really establish the kind of exact activities of the farmers on the islands and where they are hoping themselves to already consider carbon emissions, because obviously farming policy is changing. They're going to have to start reducing carbon on farms anyway. So if we can support them to do that, that's great. A lot of it is to do with the way that like silage is kept and the way manure is treated on the island, which is an incredibly difficult thing to kind of change because we're an island, we can't really do much else with it. But you know, these are things we're going to have to look into, but very early days of the farming community.
Mark?
Just a quick follow. A really interesting thing that came out of this mine was the land use element and the peatland as well. It's been a real, both a sort of the Pandora's box to some degree. I mean, it's opened up a whole lot of questions that we didn't have before, and I think we're finding this all across Scotland from that point of view. Where there's always a presumption that peat's a great thing, it's a carbon sink. It's almost always not.
I've been reading about that.
Yeah.
Places like the still peat in the poor area in Slough is still sequestering carbon because it's still building peat.
Yeah.
The way that peat releases its carbon is it loses the vegetation of the top. It then starts decomposing the peat and washing away and decomposing in other places and so on. And it's that damaged peat that causes the emissions. And there is an awful lot of damaged peat in our as far as.
Well, I would agree, and I'd say until quite recently that would have even been my understanding. But I'll be controversial here, Martin. I'd almost say we almost now have to see peat as industrial waste for the last 2,000 years. Because we changed the land when we took the trees off it, and what we modified the land, and all we've been doing is building up this peat ever since then. I mean, like we're a family where we cut peat on the top of the hill in Rendell. You come across scrubland, you come across trees. We've changed the environment, and even almost all the science now is even saying unless it's absolutely flooded bogland, lower territory, it's going to be a net emitter because it's that better balance certainly in the short term between methane and CO2. And this has come out as a really huge, really interesting thing for that point of view. And that's, I think, the Shetland Islands Council, when they did their audit, what the heck have we got here as far as our carbon budget? But then you go to that and then you take stock and then you look at it again. And there's also a question now, they're saying, what are you responsible for and what you're not responsible for? What's man-made and what isn't? And what are we going to be able to alter now and what we can't? And, and that's why you see the whole thing in the round and the whole. And as I say, so it's been really interesting, but that's that land use change has been particularly interesting.
I had a question which was really about what's going to be the point you made, Aisling, was about the fact that each of the islands is different and being done unto is different to being autonomous. And I wondered what the plan is to take the learning that you're getting from the different islands and then roll that out to the other islands and the other, I don't know how many other islands there are in Scotland, but 86. I thought it was that number. Have you any thoughts there? Because obviously transplanting your knowledge could be seen as a sort of colonial imposition of Hoy's way or Edie, for example. You know, so I'm just interested.
We've been discussing lots of different options because obviously this is a huge question and we're not entirely sure, but because of the specific nature of each of the islands, it would probably be more a model of taking specific learnings from specific places and compiling them all to match your island. So you took a different island, browsing, for example, we wouldn't be able to clone Hoy, but they could take a bit of Hoy, you know, we've got a similar development trust set up, but you know, some of what Barra's done, some of what, and that'll probably be the most effective way to do it. Because us CDOs are in such kind of tight discussion anyway, we're all quite updated on each other's islands. So when it comes to sharing, we can draw from each other.
And I just wondered, what is there sort of a vision of what that brokering service is going to be? Is that CES are going to be doing that, helping reach out? Is that going to be done by is the work of the 6 islands going to be enduring beyond, and you're going to do it? Is there any?
We're ongoing discussion with Scottish Government, as I say, at the moment. We've been putting proposals since January. All our proposals so far have been the joint working. We've got a great example. We've got 6 witnesses of what's happened this year, Neil, just by getting them speaking about it. It's going to inspire, can give people the confidence to try, and that can be supported by CS, and that's what current proposals short term.
Yeah.
But I think it is really important. If people say, oh, yeah, it's so specific, but there's common themes, common methodologies and things you can do that can let you be locally specific, but common. So you speak in the same language and achieving the same things. And I think that's a lot of it. And Becky's done a lot of work. She talked about the project guide. We're trying to see could we make that into a sort of a handbook from that point of view, a handbook for action. Which doesn't say specifically, say this is do this for RASI, do this for wherever it might be, you know, and then Becky, it needs to do it this way, and that's worked and different things that come out of it, methodologies.
Yeah, it's about looking at process and identifying processes that work across islands because they share an island list, but will have their own particular way of being implemented.
Yeah,
and they want to steal for things that worked elsewhere. Yeah, whether it's community energy or industry. I mean,
and don't do the things that didn't work.
Yeah, exactly, and that's important. Sharing the mistakes as well as the drivers.
Yeah, good. Okay. Any other questions anybody's got? Yeah.
I was wondering about tourism and how you would look at balance that. Because if a tourist goes to Hawaii for a fortnight, you provided a service in the world. And they just, it's not, you're not creating carbon or taking carbon, they're providing a service to the world, so they haven't gone to Disneyland. I just wonder whether you could regard, have a way of regarding tourism as positive.
Well, we've got plans, you know, within the action plan to look at sort of greening our tourism. So they would start with establishing, you know, similar as we did with the audits, kind of a baseline number of tourists that we get and what vehicles they're taking. And we can offer, hopefully, e-bikes in return at the kind of key hubs. So say you could pick one up at Modus and cycle to Retwick using it rather than taking a taxi. And the buses as well will be electric, and we already have one secured as well. But also we don't have like camping facilities. We don't have like a place where the camp vans can empty their toilets, for example. So we could it's within the action plan to set up like a composting service essentially, and like replacing the public toilets with more green options. How much this would kind of capitalize on tourism is unknown. The e-bikes would be rent for use, which would maintain that paid job. But, you know, there's plenty of options. We just haven't gotten real in depth with that yet.
And the question, have you got a timescale when you are? So you said you're close to announcing stuff, and Mark, you mentioned about the second year programme, they're arguing about the money, but is it to be 2 years and then finish, or is it to go on?
Well, the funding's year by year at the moment, and so at the moment, like This year, we're looking at the quick wins and the short-term actions that the community's highlighted, because unfortunately tourism didn't rate very highly in community priorities. But as we draw to the close of this financial year, so 2024, we'll be looking at hopefully a much more long-term plan, bearing in mind we'll still be running year-to-year funding.
I could drop the Scottish Government Island team here because I'm not here tonight.
Yes.
When they
might be online.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I don't mind this. No, quite generally, they came to us and said, right, we've got a year, and what we're going to get from you is you're going to get a detailed community climate action plan, and you're going to have an investment strategy by the end of this financial year. And we said, no, that's just not even possible. But what we did, we kind of that negotiation, but we said we'll do a draft act on community action plan, which we've achieved across the islands. But that is just very much like what OREF we're doing at Orkney-wide. We have that action plan, but the next 3 to 6 months are really key activity for the 6 islands, is to take that action plan, fully costed, fully detail it, and prioritise it, because that forms the investment strategy. And that's the really nitty-gritty, how we deliver it then. So then some of it's going to be what we really, really want to do, some of the things we can actually do straight away. And from that point of view, it's writing that and putting that detail. And that's a real focus. It's along with showing something worthwhile and actions coming out of all the good work this year, is to get those investment strategies in place in the 6 islands.
Yeah, sorry, I have a final question.
If it's short.
Yeah. Okay. So,
not a big study.
Yeah, we all know that Orkney don't have a lot of crofters, but for the Western Isles and the Shetland, they have much more crofters than Orkney. So I wonder what's the carbon neutral islands plan with those crofters, and what would be the possible good impact of the carbon neutral plans on those crofters? And also, those islands are quite heavily dependent on the fishing activities. So what's the carbon neutral islands plan to achieve net zero fishing plans, fishing flights? Thank you so much.
That's quite a short question, but a long answer. Yeah. But a lot of the stock is similar, as far as because it's dictated by the land rather than the practice from that point of view, as far as sheep farming, those with the crofting side. So there's lots of parallels, but there is different ways, and it'll be interesting to see how places like Lewis compare to Orkney and Yale and things like that. So on the land use side, there's that element of it. The fishing question is a really hard one, and it's like everything that we face across the world now. How do we apportion the fish supper we get at the Kirkle Harbour now? And how do we put that? Should that all be borne by Barra Atlantic in Barra or Yale for the salmon farm and all the rest? And we've got to look at those questions. But part of all of what we're doing with this is where you get ownership, and you take ownership for what you want to do. You say, what can I do myself? What can I do in partnership with others? And what can I influence? And we're doing that from the community going out, but equally important as the people in the room here are the local authorities and the Scottish Government and the wider organisations to map it all out. If that makes sense?
Yes.
But we can only do some by ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Last shot, Jim.
Two quick ones. First, in my role as audience in Monday, I wonder what the difference is between net zero carbon neutrality. Second one, 2040 for me personally is quite an ambitious target. I'm just wondering if, say, you were to discuss it with Greta Thunberg, achieving that 2040 is sufficiently ambitious for carbon neutrality.
Well, who wants to answer that? I think I want to have the carbon neutral and net zero.
Hotly debated.
I can still give you a politician's answer, Jim. So I absolutely hate net zero. I say there's only one net zero, it's a global sum. It doesn't actually matter. Well, everything we've got to try and do is decarbonise, adapt and mitigate on everything we're doing. So it's a nonsense. But it gets a headline, it becomes part of a policy document. So these are the carbon neutral islands, they're working to net zero. It's effectively the same. We can send a little paragraph for that point of view. It is that principle of just saying, on a balance sheet, it's looking roughly neutral. But what we're trying to do is not to identify every opportunity we can decarbonise. And by activity across the different sectors.
And it's back to the there's an easy way to reach net zero, but it's not people friendly. So we've tried to talk about climate resilience and communities being resilient communities in the face of climate change.
And the other question is no, 24 is too far away. So I completely believe that now. And but it's something, we've got something, and we're getting resource, we're getting focus, we're getting books written, we're having meetings that get the message out there and get people thinking and get people on that journey. And the more time we get folks just thinking about it at the front of your mind rather than the back of your mind, always accelerates and snowballs. But yeah, 2040 is not ambitious.
So just on that, Jim, there are other moves afoot as well. So, for example, there's the community planning partnership that operates in Orkney. So that's mainly the public sector organisations getting together and trying to compare and contrast and synchronise activities. There's a sustainable development recovery group that I sit on as part of that, and that has recently proposed that the planning partnership should be aimed for, it probably will not achieve, but aim for 2030 for net zero for Orkney. So there is an appetite in various places to push harder, because there's a point that was made. I remember Gareth making this point after the meeting we had with Paul Wheelhouse when he was the energy minister, and we were talking about the whole issue of different communities need to go at a different pace. We don't all have to wait. This is not like decimalisation. For those of you who remember decimalisation, 1972, February the 14th, I think it was, whatever. And basically, we woke up on that day with a different currency. Decarbonisation is not going to be like that. We're not going to get to the 31st of December 2049 and go, right, tomorrow, decarbonising then. This is going to have to be a journey, and we're going to have to get at this. And frankly, there are two parts about it. There's an advantage, as we've seen, that Orkney has achieved so far, which is by an early adopter, you learn stuff. And in the act of learning stuff, you then have knowledge, which you can then frankly export and help other people, but bring some money back as part of the process. It's a trading thing. The second thing is that if we recognise that what we're trying to do is better, the sooner we get it better, the better it is. You know, and although we have to go hard and go fast, and that will be challenging, the benefits pay back quicker. And everything you read says if we leave it to the last minute, it's not going to turn out well. There's some really good work that Susan Crumdyke's done, which she did at the last Science Festival. So who's coming to the Orkney Science Festival this year? Please get your ears open, it's a good chance. But the point was that was made there, that you look at our climate plans at the moment, even the Paris side of things, there's basically about 10% chance of achieving it. Now, as an engineering point of view, I would not set out on a project where I reckon I've got a 10% chance of success. That's adventuring, that's pioneering stuff. That's not good engineering. You need to be at least 50%, 60, you should be good solid. Have we got good solid plans for that? No. So the task is you need to write the plan, because we're not going to get it down from on top. We've got to mobilise and find a way to deal with it. And this is why this initiative is so powerful. A small group getting together and going, well, I'm not waiting, I'm just going to go for this. And it's up to us all, I think, to give as much fuel, non-carbon based, to these people to go as hard and as fast as they can. And frankly, that's exactly what came out of the Skidmore review. Recall that when the Truss's government came in, Jacob Rees-Mogg was put in charge of Bays, as it was at the time, and Chris Skidmore, an ex-MP, was tasked with finding out whether this net zero stuff is actually worth going for. And he came back with a review and went, yeah, kind of, which basically said we need to go hard, go fast, and go now. So I think all the signs are that we're just going to be in your wake in a minute. This is exactly the right thing to do. So I think it's been a really useful conversation here tonight. I hope it's inspired you to want to do something else. Do one more thing, just one more thing. Do something else. And please come along to the other OREF meetings if you're in the area. If not, try and follow us online. Next one will be out hearing what's going on in Alaska on the 2nd of May. And really, I'd just like to close up by saying my sincere thanks to you all for the work's been for the presentation tonight, but also the work you're doing. So thank you.